They told me titles were supposed to capture the essence of a story. A neat little phrase that framed the chaos, made it palatable. But when I look at mine, my ex tried to ruin my career, until my CEO girlfriend stepped in. It doesn't feel neat at all. It feels like a scar. The first half tastes bitter. My ex tried to ruin my career. She didn't just break my heart, she went for my livelihood, my future, the very thing that defined me. That's the kind of betrayal that doesn't fade with time. It brands you. And for a while, I thought that was the end of me, broken, unemployed, humiliated. But then comes the second half, sharp and commanding. Until my CEO girlfriend stepped in. Those words carry power. They sound triumphant, like a rescue. And, in a way, they were. She swept in with her authority, her connections, her ruthless intelligence. She didn't just protect me, she waged war for me. Yet there's an uneasiness buried in the title too, isn't there? Because when someone saves you like that, it changes the balance. You stop being just yourself, you become theirs, in some way. And so I can't help but wonder, what if her stepping in wasn't salvation, but the beginning of something even darker? The first time my ex tried to destroy me, it was with a smile. I still remember the way she lingered at the door of my office that morning, her lips painted in the shade I once swore looked like blood and honey. To everyone else in the room, she looked supportive, even affectionate. To me, it was the smirk of someone who knew a secret, one I hadn't discovered yet. It was Tuesday. I was halfway through preparing for a client presentation that could make or break the quarter. My slides were polished, numbers checked twice, voices rehearsed in front of the bathroom mirror until I was even sick of hearing it. Everything mattered that day. It was supposed to be mine. Until the whispers started. They rose around me like smoke. Subtle at first, just a shift in tone when I walked past desks, a half-smile too quickly hidden. Then I saw it, my name flashing in bold at the top of an office-wide email. My stomach turned ice before I even clicked it. The message looked like it had come from me. But it wasn't mine. Subject: Why our clients are idiots. And below it, paragraphs of venom, written in a voice dripping with arrogance, tearing apart the very people I was supposed to impress that afternoon. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Every word was poison, mocking clients' intelligence, laughing at their incompetence, calling the project itself a charade for people too rich to know better. It didn't matter that I hadn't written it. My name was at the top. That was all anyone needed. And when I looked up, there she was across the room, my ex leaning against a desk, arms folded, eyes bright with amusement. That same smile curving her lips. She had always been charming, dangerously so. The kind of person who could turn cruelty into charisma, wrap venom in velvet. We came from the same kind of background, scraping by, hustling through college with part-time jobs and ramen dinners. But where I had learned to fight fair, she had learned to fight dirty. She thrived on cutting others down to climb higher, and I was her favorite rung. I could see it in her face, she wanted me to fall. Not just out of her life, but out of everything I'd built. Rough morning, she whispered as she passed my desk, voice honeyed enough to fool anyone listening. I couldn't respond. My throat was too tight, my pulse hammering against my temples. I did the only thing I could think of, pulled out my phone, desperate for a distraction, a lifeline. A message blinked at the top of the screen. Charlotte, dinner tonight. Cancel everything else. Charlotte, my girlfriend. My anchor. CEO of a company whose name made people stand straighter in the room. Just seeing her name steadied me, reminded me that I wasn't alone, even if she didn't know what was happening yet. But as I stared at her message, a terrible thought curled in my chest. What would she think if she saw that email? Would she believe me when I said it wasn't mine? Or would she see it as proof that I wasn't worth the risk she was taking by being with me? Because Charlotte was power incarnate, polished, commanding, untouchable. And me? I was just a middle-class striver clinging to my place at the table. I closed my eyes, forced myself to breathe. I told myself it was just a mistake, something IT could fix, something people would forget. Until I saw the second message. Not an email this time, a photo. Doctored, but convincing. Me, sitting across a bar table from a client. My hand stretched toward theirs, an angle that made it look like something more than professional. The caption beneath. Proof of how they really get their contracts. And this time, the file wasn't just in my inbox. It was already circulating through the office. I was never meant to be here. At least, that's what the world kept reminding me. I wasn't born into boardrooms or cocktail parties or private schools where careers were practically handed out as graduation gifts. I was born into bills stacked on the kitchen counter, a mother who worked double shifts at a diner, and a father who left before I was old enough to memorize the sound of his voice. Everything I became, I clawed my way toward with a kind of desperation that made my knuckles bleed. College wasn't a given, it was a battlefield. Scholarships, late-night shifts, borrowing textbooks I couldn't afford. I didn't graduate with connections, I graduated with exhaustion and an iron will to make sure the sacrifice meant something. The job I landed afterward, a marketing associate at a mid-sized firm, wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And from there, I worked like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. But success came with shadows. With every small victory, the insecurities hissed louder, "You don't belong here. They'll find out. You're one mistake away from losing it all." Maybe that's why I clung to her the way I did, my ex. She wasn't extraordinary, not in the beginning. We were two strivers in the same storm, trading stories of overdrawn bank accounts and professors who sneered at our cheap clothes. I thought we were allies, survivors who understood each other. But what I mistook for closeness was something else entirely. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a mirror, someone to reflect her brilliance back at her, someone who would make her shine brighter by comparison. At first, I played that role willingly. She was clever, magnetic, and I let myself orbit her like she was the center of the universe. But then came the cracks. The first time I won praise at work, she sulked for days. When my ideas were chosen in meetings, she twisted them into jokes later, needling me until I laughed along. The night I got promoted, she got drunk and told me I'd never have made it without her. She couldn't stand being outshined. And I was too blinded by history and hope to walk away. Toxic doesn't arrive as poison in a glass. It seeps in slowly, drop by drop, until you can't tell where the bitterness began. I let her drag me down until I was drowning, and when I finally found the strength to break free, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the beginning of her war. And then came Charlotte. Charlotte was impossible. The first time I saw her, she owned the room without saying a word. Everyone moved when she moved. She wasn't just wealthy, she was power, distilled into a single human being. CEO of a company so influential that its logo alone could open doors. She was older than me, sharper than me, frightening in how utterly untouchable she seemed. I don't know what she saw in me. Maybe it was the hunger, the fight in my eyes that matched the steel in hers. Maybe it was novelty, me, with my middle-class roots and awkward edges, so different from the polished sycophants who usually surrounded her. Whatever it was, she pulled me into her orbit with the same inevitability of gravity. With her, everything was magnified. The first dinner she took me to, I held the menu like a weapon, panicked that I couldn't pronounce half the dishes. She noticed, and with a single hand on mine, she murmured the words for me, not mockingly, but like she was sharing a secret. That was the moment I realized she could be both intimidating and protective, the kind of force you feared but wanted on your side. Being with Charlotte felt like stepping onto a different planet. She had the kind of influence that made obstacles vanish, the kind of money that turned problems into inconveniences. Standing next to her, I felt powerful. And yet, the same insecurities whispered louder. What if she realizes you're not enough? What if she sees through you? That's where the contrast lay. My ex wielded cruelty like a knife in the dark, sneaky, vindictive, designed to cut where it hurt most. Charlotte was the opposite, she didn't need to cut. She commanded, and the world obeyed. One fought with pettiness, the other with power. But even with Charlotte by my side, the shadow of my ex clung close. She lingered in places she didn't belong, whispers in the office, sudden appearances at events, the occasional smirk that said she hadn't forgotten what she started. And she hadn't forgiven me for daring to rise higher without her. The rumor reached me on a Wednesday. I wasn't supposed to hear it, I caught it by accident, two colleagues speaking in hushed voices by the vending machine when they thought no one was listening. Slept with the boss, that's how they got the client deal. Everyone knows it. The words hit me like a slap. They weren't talking about some distant scandal. They were talking about me. And worse, about Charlotte. The implication was poisonous, that my success wasn't earned, that every deal I closed, every client I impressed, was only because I was sharing a bed with a CEO. It wasn't just an attack on my career. It was an attempt to erase every ounce of blood and sweat I'd poured into clawing my way here. And I knew exactly who had planted the rumor. My ex. The rumor didn't fade. It spread like rot. At first, it was just whispers. Colleagues exchanging glances when I entered the room, the sudden silence that fell during coffee breaks. But whispers turned into sidelong smirks, smirks turned into avoidance, and soon I realized that every word I spoke, every handshake I offered, was being weighed against a story I hadn't written. The story wasn't about my work ethic anymore. It was about me trading myself for success. Sleeping with the boss. Using Charlotte's name and power like a credit card I didn't deserve. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to drag my ex by the hair into the center of the office and force her to admit she'd started it. But instead, I did what I always did, I kept my head down and tried to work harder. I thought if I outperformed the lies, the truth would win. That was my first mistake. Because the next strike came quickly. It was a Friday afternoon when the IT department called me in. They had concerns. Files had been leaked from my account, sensitive client data, documents that could cost the company millions if competitors got their hands on them. I stared at the screen, numb, as they showed me the logins, the timestamps, the trail leading back to my username. I hadn't done it. God, I hadn't even known those files existed in my folders. But to them, denial sounded like deflection. I walked out of that meeting with sweat clinging to my back, my palms raw from clenching them into fists. My job was hanging by a thread, and someone was holding the scissors. That someone, I knew, was her. My ex. She didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. Later that day, I passed her in the hallway. She leaned close enough for her perfume to choke me and whispered, "Funny how your talent keeps backfiring." Then she smiled that same sharp smile, like a blade hidden behind lipstick. By the following week, things got worse. An anonymous complaint was filed to HR, sexual harassment, against me. The accusation was detailed, convincing, written with the kind of insider knowledge only someone who'd been close to me could fabricate. They described my clothing, my meeting habits, even phrases I often used in presentations. I sat there in the HR office, my hands trembling in my lap, trying to explain that it wasn't true. That I wasn't that person. But the more I spoke, the more their faces hardened. And that was when the panic truly set in. Because how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that you didn't harass someone, that you didn't leak files, that you didn't sleep your way to success? Lies are easy. They stick like tar. The truth, meanwhile, slips right off people's hands. My career was unraveling in front of me, thread by thread, and I couldn't stop it. Nights became unbearable. I'd sit in the dark of my apartment, staring at the ceiling, imagining the walls closing in. I couldn't tell Charlotte. Pride strangled me. How could I admit that my past, a woman I should have left long ago, was poisoning my present? How could I let Charlotte, powerful and pristine, see how small and breakable I really was? So I lied to her. When she asked why I was late, I blamed traffic. When she asked why I wasn't eating, I said I'd had lunch at the office. When she looked into my eyes with that frightening clarity of hers and asked if something was wrong, I forced a smile and told her I was just tired. But Charlotte wasn't stupid. She noticed. The way I jumped at every email notification. The way my phone stayed face down on the table. The way my hands shook when I thought she wasn't looking. She didn't press, yet. But I could feel the weight of her silence, like she was waiting for me to crack. And still, my ex kept striking. A doctored photo landed in the office Slack channel, me again, this time with a coworker at a bar, her hand on mine, the angle making it look like something intimate. After hours meetings, the caption read, "My coworker was married." The fallout was immediate. She stopped speaking to me altogether, her eyes wide with betrayal and fear. I tried to trace the file's origin, but the upload was masked. An anonymous drop. I didn't need confirmation. I knew whose fingerprints were all over it. I was drowning. Every day, it felt like another brick was tied to my chest, dragging me deeper. And then came the breaking point. Late one evening, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind to salvage what was left of my project files. I needed something clean, something untainted to prove my worth. As I sat there, the office door cracked open. Voices slipped through, muffled but sharp enough to cut. Her voice. My ex. "They're not going to last much longer," she said, amusement dripping from every syllable. Another voice responded, lower, male, steady. I froze. Good. The more their credibility burns, the easier it is for me to make my move. I leaned closer, heart pounding against my ribs. "I told you," my ex said, "working from the inside was the only way. No one suspects you. And together, we can bury them completely. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't alone. She had help. Someone inside the company. It was Charlotte who finally forced the truth out of me. I'd been unraveling for weeks, pretending to hold it together while everything inside me was bleeding. But she didn't ask this time. She commanded. One night, over dinner, after I'd barely touched my plate and my hands shook too hard to lift the wine glass, she simply said, "Tell me who's doing this to you." Her tone wasn't soft. It wasn't comforting. It was steel. And when I looked up into her eyes, I knew lying wasn't an option anymore. The story spilled out, every rumor, every doctored photo, every leak. My ex's smile, her whispers, the way she was dismantling me piece by piece. I braced for Charlotte's disappointment, the flash of judgment I'd been dreading. But instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said quietly, "Then we'll end her." The word sent a chill through me. Not help you, not defend you. End her. Charlotte stepped in like a general assuming command of a failing army. Within hours, she had her private IT team tracing the digital fingerprints on the leaked files. Within days, her legal department was combing through company policy, building a framework for retaliation. She didn't just comfort me, she mobilized. I remember one night in particular. She had all the evidence spread across her glass dining table, printouts of emails, screenshots of Slack threads, timelines marked with red ink. I stood there, staring at the chaos, feeling small and fragile against her precision. "This isn't random," she said, tapping the table with her pen. "Every leak, every rumor, every planted story, it's patterned, coordinated." Her eyes flicked to me. "She has help." I swallowed hard. I'd heard it with my own ears, but hearing Charlotte confirm it made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "And that means," she continued, "we don't just cut off the snake's head. We burn the whole nest." I should have been horrified by her ruthlessness. Instead, I felt safe, empowered, even. Standing in her shadow didn't make me smaller, it made me harder to touch. But it came with a cost. Because every time I watched Charlotte work, I realized just how little power I truly had. She commanded rooms I couldn't even step into. She pulled strings I couldn't see. I was the broken one, the bleeding one, and she was the hunter, sharpening her knives. The imbalance gnawed at me. And yet, I clung to her. What choice did I have? It was around this time that the symbol emerged. A torn contract. During one of our late-night war councils, Charlotte held up a shredded piece of paper, one of the fake HR complaints filed against me. She ripped it clean down the middle, then set her wine glass on top of it, spilling a streak of red across the ink. "Every false word she's written," Charlotte said, her voice low, "will end like this." The image burned into me, torn pages, drowned in wine like blood. From then on, it became our marker. Each piece of sabotage she dismantled, each lie we unraveled, ended the same way, papers ripped apart, drowned beneath a glass. But my ex, she was arrogant. Too arrogant to see the danger closing in. I'd catch glimpses of her in the office, laughing with her allies, tossing glances my way like she'd already won. She thought Charlotte was untouchable in the worst way, above this kind of fight. To her, Charlotte was just another rich suit who wouldn't dirty her hands with the mud of workplace politics. She didn't understand. Charlotte wasn't above it. She was beneath it, above it, inside it, she was everywhere, and she was patient. Still, fear twisted inside me. What if Charlotte was wrong? What if my ex had already done enough damage to end me, no matter what strings Charlotte pulled? I carried that dread like a stone in my chest, even as Charlotte's confidence burned like fire. Then came the night she revealed her weapon. We were in her office, polished mahogany desk, city lights spilling through the glass behind her. She slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were photos, documents, bank statements. A trail of corruption I hadn't expected. "Your ex and her accomplice," Charlotte said, "have been embezzling funds. Small amounts, cleverly hidden, but traceable." I stared at the pages, heart hammering. "How did you?" She cut me off with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "I have people. Hackers, investigators, lawyers. You think I built an empire by playing fair?" The realization sank in slowly. This wasn't just defense anymore. This was an attack. Charlotte wasn't simply protecting me, she was preparing to bury them alive. And for the first time since the sabotage began, I felt something other than fear. I felt hungry. Charlotte didn't believe in subtlety. She believed in spectacle. Pain in private is wasted, she told me one night, her voice low as she traced her fingertip along the rim of her wine glass. If you want to kill a snake, you don't just crush it, you make sure everyone sees the body twitch. That was how the first stage began. The event was one of those glittering networking nights where champagne flowed like water and everyone pretended to be friends while counting each other's contacts. My ex thrived in spaces like that. Always the loudest laugh, the sharpest dress, the one whose voice carried just far enough to remind people she mattered. I stood at the edge of the room, pulse hammering. Charlotte was beside me, poised and still, like a queen surveying her court. She nodded once to her assistant, and the lights dimmed. A screen flickered on at the front of the hall, meant for the sponsor's slideshow. But it wasn't the sponsor's logo that appeared. It was the emails. Projected larger than life, my ex's private messages to her accomplice lit up the room. Every mocking word, every line of strategy about how they'd take me down piece by piece, how she'd make sure no one ever hired me again. The room went silent. Then, the whispers began, not about me this time, but about her. I watched her face collapse in slow motion. She tried to laugh, to call it a prank, but no one was smiling with her anymore. For the first time, she looked small. And I felt something close to euphoria. A cruel, dizzying thrill as if the air itself had turned electric. My humiliation had been public, and now so was hers. But Charlotte wasn't finished. Humiliation was just the opening act. The real damage came in silence, on paper, in digits and frozen accounts. Charlotte's investigators had mapped the embezzlement trail down to the cent funds siphoned, accounts padded, the kind of fraud that didn't just get you fired, it got you prosecuted. Within days, my ex's bank accounts were locked. Her credit cards were flagged. She tried to rent a car, and the transaction was denied. Tried to book a flight, declined. Her world, built on borrowed power and fragile illusions of control, began to crumble. I didn't even need to see her to know it was happening. I heard it in the way her voice shook when she called colleagues, begging for help. I saw it in the way she stopped showing up to the office in her designer clothes and came in with the same 2 wrinkled blouses. Her career prospects evaporated overnight. Recruiters who once courted her stopped returning calls. Meetings she once bragged about were postponed indefinitely. It was Charlotte, pulling strings behind curtains, turning her from an asset into a liability no one dared touch. And yet, the thrill I'd felt at the networking event shifted into something darker. Watching her unravel wasn't just satisfying, it was frightening. Because the ruthlessness I admired in Charlotte was now fully unmasked. She wasn't defending me anymore. She was dismantling someone, brick by brick, and she was enjoying it. By the third strike, my ex was already cornered. But Charlotte didn't believe in leaving survivors. It happened at the office, in broad daylight. A carefully orchestrated confrontation. Her allies, the ones who once whispered in dark corners, feeding her lies, turned on her. Documents Charlotte had planted found their way to their inboxes, proof of the fraud, of her manipulation, of how she'd used them as pawns. I watched as one by one, they distanced themselves. The friend who used to follow her to lunch walked past her without a word. The manager who once defended her work called for security to escort her out. The look in her eyes when she realized she had no one left, it should have satisfied me. And in a way, it did. But beneath the satisfaction, there was something else, something jagged and raw, disbelief. Because I had imagined revenge 1,000 times, but never like this. Never so complete. Never so final. She was ruined. And yet, Charlotte's expression told me she wasn't finished. Nights with Charlotte became quieter, heavier. I lay beside her in her high-rise apartment, staring at the city lights, wondering who we'd become. She touched me differently now, possessively, like she wasn't just holding me but claiming me. Part of me wanted to resist, to remind myself that I was more than a project she'd saved. But another part, darker, hungrier, liked it. I liked the feeling of being wrapped in her power, of watching my enemies burn while I stood untouchable in her shadow. It was intoxicating. And terrifying. The night I thought it was over, Charlotte poured herself a glass of wine, set it on the torn contract she'd saved as a memento, and said, "She won't recover from this. Not her career, not her reputation, not her life." I nodded, relieved. "It's done, then." But Charlotte tilted her head, studying me the way she studied hostile boardrooms. Then she smiled, not warm, not kind. Calculating. "Oh no," she said softly. "It's not done. She slid a new folder across the table. Inside were industry-wide communications, emails, press statements, whispers. Charlotte had seated herself. Not just about my ex. About me. They wanted to ruin your career, she said. So I made sure your career doesn't belong to them anymore. Or to you. My throat closed as I scanned the pages. She hadn't just destroyed my ex. She'd reshaped the narrative of the entire industry. Every deal, every rumor, every future client, all tied to her intervention. I realized then, with a cold sinking dread, my ex was gone. But so was my independence. Charlotte hadn't just saved me. She'd claimed me. Entirely. My ex was finished. Not just in the way people say someone is done for, but in the truest sense. Her career was gone, her name synonymous with scandal. She couldn't walk into a lobby without whispers following her like smoke. Her bank account was drained, her allies scattered, her future reduced to job rejections and blocked numbers. I saw her once, weeks later, outside the office she used to strut into with her head high. She was smaller somehow, swallowed by the oversized coat she wore, her makeup smeared as if she hadn't slept in days. She didn't notice me, she was too busy pleading with someone over the phone. Her voice cracked as she begged for a meeting, just one chance to clear things up. It should have satisfied me. And, in a way, it did. She had taken a hammer to my life, and now the shards of hers were scattered at her feet. Justice had been served. But justice has a bitter aftertaste. Because when I turned away from her and rode the elevator back up to Charlotte's penthouse, the triumph dulled. Every victory had been hers, every strike orchestrated by her hand. I hadn't reclaimed my career, she had. I was the face that smiled through it all, but she was the engine beneath it, the whispers in the right ears, the silence in others, the knives placed perfectly in the dark. At first, I told myself it was love. Charlotte loved me, so she fought for me. She saved me when no one else would. But the more I watched her work, the ease with which she dismantled reputations, the thrill in her eyes when she cornered someone, the harder it became to believe it was only love. It was controlled. Her affection and her ruthlessness were inseparable. She protected what was hers because that's who she was. And I was hers now. Nights in her apartment became colder, even when her body pressed against mine. The city skyline glittered outside, mocking me with its illusion of freedom. I had what I thought I wanted, my name cleared, my career intact, my enemies destroyed. But I could feel her grip in every email that arrived, every meeting I landed, every colleague who suddenly spoke to me with deference. It was no longer my climb. It was her stage. I told myself to be grateful. I told myself to be proud. But in the silence between us, when her hand rested heavy on mine and her smile curved just a little too sharply, I knew the truth. I hadn't just survived betrayal. I had traded one master for another. I thought I'd won back my career, but what I didn't realize, was that it now belonged to her.